Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I forgot to send out the invitation and the on Facebook and on the emails, but I send them at the last minute at 7:30, so maybe we'll have a few more people drop in. Of course, it is the first day of the fast, so I know a lot of people may be still munching away. Uh, Fortunately, at 80 years old, I'm long past the obligation to do the fast. I would say that I do it anyway, but I would be lying. Um, so, at any rate, I am going to skip around a bit tonight. The topic is the first years, or not going to cover all of the first years, but the first years of the revelation of the Bab. And one thing that I want to make clear is that while we will go in a somewhat linear historical perspective as we have with the previous religions, you'll remember that after the religions become revealed, they split up and they go in different branches, and that's where we stopped studying. Well, since that hasn't happened with the faith, we've got a lot more studying and a lot more information. But we still split up in the sense that we can follow the Bab and everything that happens to the Bab, but simultaneous with the events that happen to the Bab are all the events that happen to his followers. And so there are things all happening all around Persia because, as we said last week, the Babi faith spreads like wildfire. Everyone was anticipating the return of the hidden imam, and then suddenly someone's proclaiming it and proving it to the satisfaction of some of the most learned people in the country. And so you can imagine what effect and impact that had, and we're going to look at some of that tonight. I'm also going to show you some more resources for your in-depth study should you want to pursue that. So we're going to do a couple of things tonight that are a little bit different. It won't be quite so linear. Let me share my screen and we'll get started with the PowerPoint, though I'm going to stop at some places and read a couple of things to you because they're so beautiful. So the name of the class is The First Years of the Bab's Ministry, Part 1, because it's going to take us more than one class simply do the first years. Now, remember, the Bab's ministry as such lasts only 6 years. He declares it, well, 7 years altogether. He declares himself in 43, and then he is executed in 1850. And then the first 3 years, he is going about pretty much at the beyond his willpower. He is manipulated by one source of authority, then another, and so very quickly he ends up in Maku in 1847, and so there's only that's 3 years into his ministry, and then really almost 4. And then there's only 3 years after that he is executed. But as I say, while he is in prison, the better part of his ministry, at least the last 3 years of it, all kinds of things are happening throughout the land with almost like characters in a play. And so we're going to get to know some of those. I know the names are difficult for you, as they are for me to pronounce and sometimes to remember. So we're going to shorten them, and I'll show you how we're going to do that just for our own ability to remember them. But before we get started, we're going to do something that I thought particularly important, even though it might be seem to be jumping ahead. It's really not. I'm defining just very broadly from my own perspective here 2 terms: proofs and prophecies. What is a proof? What is a prophecy? They're often interchangeably used, and they're really not quite the same. Uh, and this is just my general take on it, that a proof is largely for people during the life of the prophet or during their own lives, things that uh, uh, prove the assertion of the manifestation that he is indeed who he claims to be. And there are five, really six altogether, but one of them is sort of an extension of the other, that Baha'u'llah gives in the Book of Certitude. And the reason we're going to look at those is because what he is proving is the identity and station of the Bab. Now, he says this book, the Book of Certitude, can be used to prove the identity or the both the efficacy and the station of any prophet. You can apply the standards he sets forth, these proofs, to any of them, and they'll work. And you'll see why. Uh, and then prophecies, we've talked about this before, especially during the question and answer period, are really largely for the future. And retrospectively, we become confirmed that every manifestation was aware of and connected to the previous manifestation and was intent on establishing the necessary clues and confirmations for the advent of the next manifestation. So they're really valuable. They are valuable. I'm not saying they're less valuable than proofs. They're very valuable because we look back, for example, and we see Abdul Baha interpret the book of Revelations by St. John the Divine, and we see that St. John the Divine was prophesying, like with the two witnesses, Muhammad and Imam Ali. So that not only is amazing to us that St. John the Divine foresaw and prophesied the advent of Islam and what would happen to it and so on. And so these are links, if you will, in the Abrahamic line of prophets. But in retrospect, there's no way that someone reading the book of St. John the Divine at the time it was revealed uh, that they could have foreseen that, oh, I see what's going to happen. So that's what I'm saying. It's largely retrospective, but no less valuable in a sense. Whereas the proof of the manifestation is something that you need right here and now, because you've got to decide, do I believe these claims? If so, and this is what happened to my own study of the faith, uh, I was not, as I've said before, particularly searching for a new religion. But when my brother uh, provided me information about it at my behest, uh, I realized that there was only one logical conclusion I could draw, and that was either Baha'u'llah was who he claimed to be, or he wasn't. If he was, I could not follow him, because he was in effect the return of Christ, and his um, description of progressive revelation, if valid, uh, obligated me to follow him. And I don't mean I would do so against my will, but so my point of view was, let me see if I can disprove this. If I can't, then I've got to follow it. I have no choice. Now, one thing you need to be aware of, or I would like you to be aware of, is that chapter 6 in a book I wrote, this is the cover for the second edition of it, called The Ocean of His Words, A Reader's Guide to the Art of Baha'u'llah. This is something I wrote a few years back. And but in it, in chapter 6, is a complete outline of the whole of the Book of Certitude. And that's why I bring it up now, is because the outline itself demonstrates how structured that work is as a proof, as an argument, is what the Baha'u'llah himself calls it in the book. The Guardian calls it also an apologia for the Babi faith. An apologia means a proof, or an approbation, or an analysis of a concept. So it is, while a proof of progressive revelation in general and the station of the manifestations in general. It is specifically used to analyze proofs of the Bab's proclamation or assertion that he is the return of the hidden Imam, that he is the Qaim, that he is the Mahdi, and that he is the return of Muhammad and Christ, that this is the last judgment, and so on. And so these proofs are, you'll notice, are from the Book of Certitude. And if you'll notice, I've given you the page numbers where they occur. And it's not something I have inferred. Baha'u'llah states very specifically, the most outstanding proof is this, another proof is this, and so on. It's not hard to figure out how to outline it. It's an exercise. I started to show how structured the work was, and I found I couldn't stop because the work is so tightly structured that it sort of begs you to approach it that way. So here's the first proof, the Word of God, or what is called metaphorically the city of God. And if you remember, Abdu'l-Baha says the descent, if you will, of the New Jerusalem is something that occurs every time a manifestation appears and reveals his teachings. Then the Word of God is the city of the holy city come down to earth again. Behold how lofty is the station, how consummate the virtue of these verses which he hath declared to be his surest testimony. So his infallible proof, the evidence of his all-subduing power. And he's referring here to the Bab, and he's referring to all the manifestations in this case. So sometimes he will give examples of the Bab, but he's also again saying this is true with every prophet. Now, remember a couple of classes ago, we talked about one of the proofs he mentions earlier, which isn't part of this discussion. That's earlier in the book where he talks about there are signs in the celestial heavens, in the literal heavens, and then in the heavenly, celestial heavens, meaning the spiritual heavens as well. Well, those are signs, but these are proofs, a little bit different. The evidence of his all-subduing power and a revelation of the potency of his will. He, the divine king, hath proclaimed the undisputed supremacy of the verses of his book over all things that testify to his truth. For compared with all other proofs and tokens, the divinely revealed verses shine as the sun, whilst other are as stars. So the first and foremost proof of the manifestation is his ability to reveal the verses of God without a forethought, without totally spontaneous. And this is something we're going to see with the Bab, perhaps, and discuss more perhaps than you have previously. This passage goes on, to the peoples of the world, they, and I put in the verses, are the abiding testimony, the incontrovertible proof, the shining light of the ideal king. Their excellence is unrivaled, their virtue nothing can surpass. They are the treasury of the divine pearls and the depository of the divine mysteries. They constitute the indissoluble bond, the firm cord, the Orvatul Varska, I have no idea how to pronounce that. The inextinguishable light, through them floweth the river of divine knowledge, and gloweth the fire of his ancient and consummate wisdom. This is the fire which in one and the same moment kindleth the flame of love in the breast of the faithful, and induceth the chill of heedlessness in the heart of the enemy. Now again, recall, if you will, several classes ago when we talked about the two trumpet blows foretold in the Quran, that the first, the revelation of the Bab, would be shocking. It would startle the peoples of the world. It would subdue them. It would, as the Quran says, make them swoon with both, and here you can see, with a positive shock that it has occurred, or if they are enemies of the faith, it will induce chill of heedlessness in their hearts. Proof number 2. Amongst the proofs demonstrating the truth of this revelation is this, that in every age and dispensation, whenever the invisible essence was revealed in the person of his manifestation, certain souls, obscure and detached from all worldly entanglements, would seek illumination from the sun of prophethood and moon of divine guidance, and would attain unto the divine presence. Now here he's not talking as he did with the, talking about the celestial, the earthly signs that come before, like Sheikh Ahmad or Sayyid Kazim. Here he's talking about individuals who followed during the time of the prophet. And the examples he gives are people like Mullah Hossein and Khodus. And he lists them in God Passes By, Shoghi Effendi does. The third proof, another proof and evidence of the truth of this revelation, which amongst all other proofs shineth as the sun, is the constancy of the eternal beauty in proclaiming the faith of God. Though young and tender of age, and though the cause he revealed was contrary to the desire of all the peoples of the earth, both high and low, rich and poor, exalted and abased, king and subject, yet he arose and steadfastly proclaimed it. All have known and heard this. He was afraid of no one. He was regardless of consequences. Could such a thing be made manifest except through the power of divine revelation and the potency of God's invincible will? Now notice that he's talking in the past tense, because this was revealed, the Kitab-i-Igan, in 62. So this is 12 years after the Bab has been executed. So he's talking in the past tense about him. So we usually think, those of us who have learned a little bit about the Bab, of him as this is a very dramatic part of the heroic age, when there were battles and people like Tahirih sacrificing their lives and so on. Very dramatic, and it is very dramatic. And there have been plays written about it and so on, movies. Of course, the movie The Gate was about this. But what is not focused on nearly so much, and needs to be, is the, and that's what this is about here. It's saying the Bab knew from the beginning, and he told his family when he left Shiraz, he said, it's the last time I'll see you, that he knows he's going to be martyred. He tells Khodus that he knows Khodus is going to be martyred, and so on. And he doesn't say this in a cautionary way. He says, in effect, this is a reward that you will receive to have this honor. So he knows, as all manifestations do, how things are going to end. But he, as this proof says, his constancy in continuing to proclaim, regardless of what happens to him, is one of the proofs. All right. So the proof, of course, of the immaculacy of his person, that's one kind of proof, but he's skipping over those to show proofs that are available even in the future, when you don't have access to know a great deal about the personhood of the Bab. Now, this is where I've made another proof, even though this is part of that third proof, but I've made it another one because I love this passage, unaided and alone. It's terribly important, because even though you can say, well, they are aided, Christ had his disciples, then Muhammad had his followers, and Ali and the Imams and so on. But basically, the religion does not get off the ground unless the manifestation sacrifices everything to carry out his mission. And among the evidences of the truth of his manifestation were the ascendancy, the transcendent power and supremacy with which he, the revealer of being and manifestation of the adored, hath unaided and alone revealed through the world. No sooner revealed throughout the world. No sooner had that eternal beauty revealed himself in Shiraz in the year 60. And of course, that's 1260, the lunar year of AH after Hajira, and rent asunder the veil of concealment. Then the signs of the ascendancy, the might, the sovereignty, and power emanating from that essence of essences, this and sea of seas, were manifest in every land, so much so that from every city there appeared the signs, the evidences, the tokens, the testimonies of that divine luminary. How many were those pure and kindly hearts which faithfully reflected the light of that eternal sun? And how manifold the emanations of knowledge from that ocean of divine wisdom, which encompassed all beings. In every city, all the divines and dignitaries rose to hinder and repress them, and girded up the loins of malice, of envy and tyranny for their suppression. Now this becomes another sign. Proof 5 or proof 4. The one God is my witness, wert thou to ponder a while, thou will recognize that from apart all these established truths and above mentioned evidences, the repudiation, cursing, and execration pronounced by the peoples of the earth are in themselves the mightiest proof and surest testimony of the truth of these heroes of the field of resignation and detachment. Whenever thou dost meditate upon the cavils uttered by the peoples of the people, be they divines, learned or ignorant, the firmer and the more steadfast wilt thou grow in the faith. For whatsoever hath come to pass hath been prophesied by them who are the minds of divine knowledge and recipients of God's eternal law. So they know what's going to happen. But the very fact that they are so repudiated by the very leaders, religious leaders of the religion they have come to fulfill, is one of the signs that this must be true, or else these individuals would pay no heed. They wouldn't be troubled. And you're going to see this, even a part of it tonight. We'll see it more next time when you see what happens as he approaches the Shah. There are at least 4 occasions where he tries to get in touch with the Shah, to get audience with the Shah, as does Mullah Hossein. He writes letters to the Shah, and the Shah wants to meet him. The Shah is curious about all this that's going on in the south, in Shiraz. And of course, he's up in Tehran or in Qum. And finally, the 6th proof, and this is very humorous, and Baha'u'llah has a wonderful humor, great irony throughout the Igan. And here's one of them. He says, I really don't like this kind of stuff. And this gets into the prophecies. He says, I really don't like them, but since so many of you do, I will do what I can to accommodate you. So at any rate, although we did not intend to make mention of the traditions of a bygone age, and here he's talking about traditions both in the sense of literally hadiths, which are traditions, but also prophecies of any bygone age. Yet, because of our love for thee, we will cite a few which are applicable to our argument. We do not feel their necessity, however, inasmuch as the things we have already mentioned suffice the world and all that is therein. You see the irony there. You don't really need this, but okay. In fact, all the scriptures and mysteries thereof are condensed into this brief account. So much so that were a person to ponder it a while in his heart, he would discover from all that hath been said the mysteries of the words of God, and would apprehend their meaning of whatever hath been manifested by that ideal king. As the people differ in their understanding and station, we will accordingly make mention of a few traditions. And of course, that's my own inflection. That's not Baha'u'llah's tone necessarily, but I think it is. that these may impart constancy to the wavering soul and tranquility to the troubled mind. Thereby will the testimony of God unto the people, both high and low, be complete and perfect. And so he goes on for many pages to, I think, about 5 different hadiths. He explicates them just beautifully and shows the symbolic meaning of them. So that's isn't that lovely, the tone, though, but you don't need it. I've already proved everything you need, but I'll show you how the prophecies have been fulfilled. And that's what he's referring to. And that's why I started out distinguishing between a proof and a prophecy. So basically, proof 6 consists of prophecies. Now, tools. I've been talking a lot, and I'm trying to improve the website, not the YouTube channel, but the website, to include a resource, compilation of resources for you. And I want to mention a couple of them tonight, because as we're getting into Baha'i history, we don't have to speculate much because it's all available to us, but in all, not all in one place. So as I said last time, 2 tools that I think you need to have are, first of all, I said a good map where you can trace where these things are happening. And I even provided one for you, and I'm going to continue to use that one because it was created for the purpose of this early part of the faith, where the place names, as they were in the 18th century, that are connected to the faith are specifically mentioned. Another tool I said that was important was a timeline. And there's several of those available, and I will list them for you on I listed them in the last session, but there are other places you can get them online. So you can buy the books, but almost all of these are also available online. So a basic Baha'i dictionary. This concerns all of these names of individuals we're talking about, as well as terms that deal with Baha'i concepts, Baha'i places, place names, and so on. So Maku, or Mirza Hossein Ali, all of the important names, that's the name for the Baha'u'llah. Well, all of these terms and names, Mashrikul Azkar, covenant, and so on, the different kinds of covenants, all of these are covered, and they're not only covered in this basic Baha'i dictionary, but the citations from which the definition is taken are given as well, and that's very helpful if you want to read more. Glossaries, these are websites for, there are 2 different ones I've given you here, of terminology. I was going to start putting one together for the class, and I realized it's already been done. I wanted to do it tonight to show you that this is sort of, we're watching a play, if you will, or a movie about the Bab, and you've got the main characters, and who are they? And so I was putting that together, and then I realized, well, really, that I'm kind of replicating what's been done very thoroughly in these 2. So you can simply go, I could do it now, but I don't want to take the class time. I could simply double click on that, and it would go right to it. So these will be on the slides, which you can download for yourself. A guide to pronunciation and transliteration. This is very helpful, and it's certainly helpful for me as I try my best in my very inept way to pronounce these very difficult terms and names sometimes. Of course, for the history, the 2 places you must look for, now this is for Babi history. The Dawnbreakers, of course, by Nabil. There's another volume that hasn't been translated. Nabil, as you may remember, was so upset when Baha'u'llah died that he took his own life. But He was a devoted follower of Baha'u'llah, and he wrote this incredible work that one of the first things the Guardian did to show you how important the Guardian thought this work is, and for us to know it and read it, is this is one of the first things he did was to translate this immense work. All right, so you want to get this if you don't have it. There's also the French footnotes that go with this, and I'm not going to explain now why they're in French, but suffice to say, if you go online at the Baha'i bookstore and look for the French footnotes to this, they're there. God passes by, either in the hardbound, the old hardbound, if you can get a copy online, and it's no longer published in the hardbound that I'm aware of, or you can get the paperback. It's the same material, and it's just wonderful. It's a gift. It's not meant to be a history in the normal sense. It is a history, but it's more than that. It's an analysis of the history. So it's excerpting the most important events. So it's not rambling in any way. And it's written by Shoghi Effendi as a centenary gift to the Baha'is of the East and the West, because he did the same thing in Persian. This came out in 1944 on the anniversary of the Declaration of the Bab. And it's just an amazing work. So before you study any part of the faith, you want to see in the index if there's something the Guardian has said about it and God passes by. Whether it's a work of the Bab or a work of Baha'u'llah or an individual. If the individual is mentioned and God passes by, you know that individual is important. The map, of course, as I said last week, and this is the same map, and this is the one we're going to be using for a while. Now, a couple of things I want you to notice about this map. These dotted lines are demarking the provinces. So this is Kurdistan, this is Azerbaijan, this is Khorasan, Yazd and Kerman. This is the province of Fars, and that's important to know because it's the governor of Fars who treats Khodus and his companions so abominably and tortures them. Neriz, of course, we remember, you will know about later, because this is where one of the great battles during the period of 1848 to 1850 takes place. The other up here in Fort Sheikh Tarbarsi, and then Badasht up here, of course. So it's important you get the lay of the land. So here's Baghdad, here are the mountains of Hamadan that Baha'u'llah crossed in the middle of winter when he was released from the Sea of Chal and so on. So Bushir, Shiraz, and then Baha'u'llah, the Bab, goes from Shiraz to Isfahan, to Kashan, to Knergard and Kulain. He's only 28 miles from Tehran when his progress is stopped. So the journey of the Bab, he's going to Tehran. He's been invited to Tehran to meet with the Shah, and he gets this close when the prime minister convinces the Shah that no, this isn't a good idea, and that's where he's sent to Maku. Let's look at the timeline once again and get back in touch with the progress of what's happened so far. The governor of Fars, so again, you see back with the map here, the governor of this area here, orders the Bab arrested and brought to Shiraz because of the commotion surrounding followers and the Bab's instructions about the call to prayer. Now, this is something we'll get into later. A lot of these, of course, I like to say that a lot, but it's true that we just can't cover everything at one time. The Bab, foreknowing this, walks toward Shiraz and meets the soldiers 40 miles from the city. And this is a very interesting story in itself. that they're going to arrest him, you know, on their horseback and so on. And there he is walking 48 miles, 40 miles from Shiraz, walking to meet them, to be arrested because he knows they're going to arrest him. This thing about the call to prayer, that's something we'll get, that's what I'm talking about, we'll get to later. That's interesting. What he does basically is has one of his followers change the call to prayer, and it causes quite a stir, as you can imagine. So that's on the 23rd of June. On the 7th of July, the Bab is publicly interrogated, struck in the face, and released into the custody of his maternal uncle. Now, this is an important name, and we're just going to call him the Bab's uncle because his name is not that difficult, Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. But he's a very important figure. Remember, I said last time he becomes one of the 7 martyrs of Tehran. He is a devout believer in the Bab, and it is at he's basically under house arrest at the home of Haji Mirza Sayyid Ali. But the Bab has another maternal uncle who is the one that writes to Baha'u'llah asking certain questions. He is not a convert at that point, and he asks questions that result in the Book of Certitude. So during this time, the Bab makes an announcement in the Mosque of Hakil that he is neither the representative of the hidden Imam nor the gate to him, that his station is higher. So again, I've said this before, but it's important to say, once the manifestations have revealed publicly who they are not shy about saying it. So, I mean, on the one hand, they are meek and humble and kindly and subservient before God, but they're not subservient before human beings. They have a station that, you know, the tone of the letters of Baha'u'llah to the kings and rulers. They're not meek and mild. They're saying, you know, the thing you have been waiting for has occurred. And if you don't follow it, terrible things are going to happen. You're going to lose your kingdom and so on. July through November, we have the story of Vahid and the story of Hujjat. And then later we'll get into the story of Tahireh. And this is the story of Vahid. Now, this is for your benefit. This is from God Passes By. And the story you may be familiar with, but to simplify it, the Shah is so interested on what's going on down in Shiraz that he gets Vahid, who is known throughout the land as the most learned of the learned. No one dares speak up in his presence to contradict anything he says. And so the Shah says, go down there, interview the Bab, find out what his capacity is, and basically show him up for what he is, or find out if there's some validity to what he's saying. Now, here's a description of the fact that the Vahid goes to, and this is for your own meditation reflection as I read something to you. His total name is Sayyid Yahya, which simply means John, Sayyid Yahya Darabi, and surname Vahid, not to be confused with Vahid. Vahid means 19 or completion. So he goes there and he has 3 interviews with the Bab. And the first interview, you can see here, the Guardian says, their first interview centered around the metaphysical teachings of Islam. I'm reading down here. The most obscure passages of the Quran and the traditions and prophecies of the Imams. In the course of the second interview, Vahid was astounded to find the questions which he had intended to submit for elucidation had been effaced from his retentive memory. And yet, to his utter amazement, he discovered that the Bab was answering the very questions he had forgotten. But the big one is the third interview. And I'm going to read to you what, from his own words, what Vahid says. I resolved that in my third interview with the Bab, and here, let me let you focus on this while I talk to you. It didn't take place there. It took place in the house of his uncle. But this is a place where you can meditate as I read this. I resolved that for my third interview with the Bab, I would in my inmost heart request him to reveal for me a commentary on the Surah of Qasar. Now, Qasar is, of course, the Surah of Qasar is in the Quran, but Qasar is a river in paradise, the river of bounty, from which all bounties flow. I determined not to breathe that request in his presence. Now, this is interesting to me because I thought it was Mullah Hussein who had not revealed to the Bab what he wanted him to explicate, which was the Surah of Joseph. But I obviously got it confused because this is Vahid, says he wasn't going to reveal to it. Should he, unasked by me, reveal this commentary in a manner that would immediately distinguish it in my eyes from the prevailing standards current amongst the commentaries on the commentators on the Quran, I then would be convinced of the divine character of his mission and would readily embrace his cause. If not, I would refuse to acknowledge him. As soon as I was ushered into his presence, a sense of fear for which I could not account suddenly seized me. My limbs quivered as I beheld his face. I, who on repeated occasions had been introduced into the presence of the Shah and had never discovered the slightest trace of timidity in myself, was now so awed and shaken that I could not remain standing on my feet. The Bab, beholding my plight, arose from his seat, advanced towards me, and taking hold of my hand, seated me beside him. Seek from me, he said, whatever is your heart's desire. I will readily reveal it to you. I was speechless with wonder, like a babe that can neither understand nor speak. I felt powerless to respond. He smiled as he gazed at me and said, were I to reveal for you the commentary on the Surah of Qasar, would you acknowledge that my words are born of the Spirit of God? Would you recognize that my utterance can in no wise be associated with sorcery or magic? Tears flowed from my eyes as I heard him speak these words. All I was able to utter was this verse of the Quran. O our Lord, with ourselves we have dealt unjustly. If thou forgive us not and have not pity on us, we shall surely be of those who perish. It was still early in the afternoon when the Bab requested Haji Mirza Sir Ali to bring the pen case and some paper. He then started to reveal his commentary on the Surah of Qasar. How am I to describe this scene of inexpressible majesty? Verses streamed from his pen with a rapidity that was truly astounding. The incredible swiftness of his writing, the soft and gentle murmur of his voice, and the stupendous force of his style amazed and bewildered me. He continued in this manner until the approach of sunset. He did not pause until the entire commentary of the surah was completed. He then laid down his pen and asked for tea. Soon after, he began to read it aloud in my presence. My heart leapt madly as I heard him pour out in accents of unutterable sweetness those treasures enshrined in that sublime commentary. I was so entranced by its beauty that 3 times I was on the verge of fainting. He sought to revive my failing strength with a few drops of rose water, which he caused to be sprinkled on my face. This restored my vigor and enabled me to follow his reading to the end. When he had completed his recital, the Bab arose to depart. He entrusted me as he left to the care of his maternal uncle. He is to be your guest, he told him, until the time when he, in collaboration with Mullah Abdul Karim, shall have finished transcribing this newly revealed commentary and shall have verified the correctness of the transcribed copy. Mullah Abdul Karim and I devoted 3 days and 3 nights to this work. We would in turn read aloud to each other a portion of the commentary until the whole of it had been transcribed. We verified all the traditions in the text and found them to be entirely accurate. Such was the state of certitude to which I had attained, that if all the powers of the earth were to be leagued against me, they would be powerless to shake my confidence in the greatness of his cause. Well, there's more, and that's from Nabil's Dawnbreakers. But of course, the main point is the Shah had sent him to interrogate and presumably to humble the Bab, and instead he never returned to the Shah and simply wrote him that the Bab was who he claimed to be and that he had become a Babi. Here's another one. That, again, these are like characters in a play, but each one is a play within itself. This is the story of Hujat of Zanjan. And he becomes an important figure later, as all of these characters do, in the attack on Zanjan. Another famous advocate of the cause of the Bab, even fiercer in zeal than Vahid, and almost as eminent in rank, was Mullah Muhammad Ali Zanjani, surnamed Hujat. An Akbari, a vehement controversialist of a bold and independent temper of mind, impatient of restraint, a man who had dared condemn the whole ecclesiastical hierarchy from the Avabu Arbai down to the humblest mullah. He had more than once, through his superior talents and fervid eloquence, publicly confounded his orthodox Shia adversaries. Such a person could not remain indifferent to a cause that was producing so grave a cleavage among his countrymen. The disciple he sent to Shiraz to investigate the matter fell immediately under the spell of the Bab. The perusal of but a page of the Qayyum al-Asma brought by that messenger to Hujat sufficed to effect such a transformation within him that he declared before the assembled ulama of his native city that should the authors of that work produce day to be night, pronounce day to be night and the sun to be a shadow, he would unhesitatingly uphold his verdict. So he read one page from the Qayyum al-Asma, and like Baha'u'llah before him, he knew that this was a manifestation of God. I will not read this one because our time is drawing nigh, but this is another a man who had compiled 12,000 traditions and prophecies about the promised revelation, and he too was convinced. So we'll see the rest of the timeline as how the Bab gets from this point to this point, this crucial point, and what happens there. We'll get to it next time. And we'll also get into what's happening in other places such as Karbala and Baghdad and Qazvin and so on, with Tahireh, who's causing an amazing stir. Very daring, very daunting figure. So we'll go to the end right now and finish. But thank you for coming, even though I failed to announce it. It is the end of my formal presentation or informal presentation.